Welcome, viewers, to Speaking of Our Words, a production of the Kenosha Writers Guild. We will be bringing you in this format a series of videos to allow you, the viewer, the opportunity to experience the oral reading of the work of local writers, a rare opportunity. Additionally, for your enjoyment and to give you insight into their creative process, we will interview the writers right here about their work. I'm Marshall Smith and I'm your host. I'm a published poet and studied creative writing in the MFA program at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. Today, Joe Engel of the Kenosha Writers Guild will read his poetry and talk to us about it. Joe, a hearty welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
What will you share with us today?
Well, I've got two poems. One of them is older, written about 9 years ago, and the other one is newer, written about maybe, I think, probably 9 months to a year ago. So, yeah.
Great. Go right ahead.
Oh, okay. All right. The first poem is called Holding the Line. The rusty train cars are 20 empty-handed merchants sitting silent but ready like always. Stubborn in the wind, which whips a lash of brittle howls across this iron-framed picture of sleep. This ubiquitous breeze, flustered by forgotten ways of freight, tosses a Bailey hat into its own mouth. Between the tracks, there's a young man casting dreams of romance and drags off his cigarette and swigs from a bottle of whiskey. He sits in light as thin as mist on a pile of books, which a drifter sees with hands like flint, wide-eyed for warmth. Though someone tends to all these snoring beasts, to all this graffiti, with a yawning gate and a flashlight for hope. Who knows every crater on the moon by name and has taken to making up constellations. His wife is the light on at home, who drinks up the wine and is used to the cold side of their bed, except nights that her burning arm finds their dog Orion, her smoke. Dragging into home, burnt and early, their bedroom door blares open to his red eyes full of choked out sun, of thoughts on vagrants or what might have howled down between the trains. He brings the smell of night and granite and tar, which makes her more awake, coughs a bit, and then, in full eclipse, begins to pull the shades.
Thank you. That was very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice. That has to me, I get a something a bit forlorn about that, about in the tone of that poem. So, can you tell us about this poem, maybe where you were when you wrote it, and how the idea came to you? How long did it take you to write it?
Yeah. Well, I was on the couch at my parents' house
Okay.
when I wrote this thing, and I'm sure that it must have been 2 o'clock in the morning. So I believe it was written over the course of a couple days for the first draft. And then beyond that, probably the course of 3 weeks or so. Yeah, the idea, like how it came to me, it's kind of born out of this idea that romanticizing certain things, romanticizing an era or a lifestyle is dangerous. And in this case, what I suppose I'm being somewhat critical of is this idea that, you know, living out of a train yard, you know, riding the rails across the country, is somehow romantic, you know, when in reality that lifestyle, I believe, was born during the Great Depression, and there was nothing romantic about it. You know, it was born out of hardship. It was born out of destitution, and I guess I'm writing this poem sort of as a reality check as well about the life of actually living in a train yard. You know, it's written at least partially about the guard or night watchman for the train yard and what his life is like. You know, someone who has to be there. So or the drifter who is there, who is struggling in life in general. So, yeah, the idea comes as it's a social criticism of seeing only the adventure. I mean, I could see that that there would be a lot of adventure if you could do that. If you could do it sort of as recreation, I suppose, or if you had something to go back to after living a lifestyle like that. But I think for the men and women that originally led that lifestyle, and still do, there still are homeless men, homeless women who have to lead that lifestyle and they have no other choice. So hopefully that makes some sense, and that's essentially what I was trying to capture.
I see. So you're addressing the illusion of this being a romantic lifestyle when in fact it's hard and tough and rough. It's a lifestyle of hard knocks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. Now, so you are empathizing with these people, and in the poem doing so, it doesn't have biographical value. It's
Right.
empathizing with something that you have seen in the world of human life.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm definitely trying to do that. Yeah.
Okay. So, approximately how many poems would you say you've written? And I'm actually trying to move that question toward the question of how do your ideas come to you?
Wow. Well, I would say that I've probably written, if you include the failures, probably 200 poems. And they come to me in different ways. They can come like this, out of an idea that is kind of coupled with a feeling as well. Sometimes it'll just come straight out of a feeling, and then with that feeling, if there's an image that I can conjure, or if there's an image that comes with the feeling, a poem. Hopefully a poem can be created. If I'm lucky, a poem can be created. And then also, if I'm searching for a poem, I don't have a feeling, I don't have an idea, I don't have an image, I'll just sit and wait.
How interesting.
Yeah.
And wait till you can begin to channel something?
Right, yeah.
Until some idea floats in and you can then begin to spin it out on paper or on the computer. How do you write it out by hand, or do you do it on the computer?
I write by hand. I write at least the first draft by hand, sometimes 2 or 3 drafts by hand. And then from there, I will type it into the computer. Yeah.
Now, do you prefer to write it out? I mean, you make a conscious choice. I want to write it out before I put it in the computer.
Yeah, I do.
And why would you do that? What is the reason?
For me, it's more stream of conscious. There's a lot less self-editing that happens when I'm writing in a notebook, when I'm using a pen. And I can do it anywhere. It's kind of an example. I like to sit outside on the patio of the coffee shop in the summertime, and I can't even see my computer screen when the sun is shining on it. So, like in an instant like that, it's just
practical.
Right? Yeah.
Got it. Well, I've heard that said before by writers, which is why I asked you about that. They prefer to write it out with a pen or a pencil or whatever, because they do feel like the stream of consciousness can be more easily channeled that way than on the computer. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, if you erase something on the computer, you may not remember that in an hour what you had in there worth writing. You can always look back and see where you started, what you had before, and make decisions.
Yeah.
So this poem that you just read, did you, when you began writing it, did you kind of know what it was like, what was going to be at the beginning and then all the way through to the end, or did it just kind of evolve as you were writing it?
I did not know. No, I definitely didn't know. I knew that there would be a night watchman, and that's about all I knew.
So you
And-
discovered the feeling as you wrote. You had the feeling
much,
already,
very much.
and now you put the feeling down in words, and it probably took on some different shapes and sizes and words
Absolutely.
in words. Okay.
Yeah. It definitely had a mind of its own. Not sure how much. Like, I don't necessarily believe in the channeling, but I believe that subconsciously things happen, and images and words float to the surface, float and, turn into images. So, yeah.
Great. So we're talking about putting the poem together like the one you just read, and what about the editing as you're working through the poem? Do you do a lot of editing?
I do. So recently I was working on a poem. There was a first draft in my notebook, and I liked the idea, I liked the feeling, I liked the theme, but it felt flat. So there I had to step back from the poem. It's like, okay, you're not showing, you're telling your audience what's happening. So I had to step back and remember that I'm good with images, and then kind of go line by line and let those images kind of come to the surface.
Very interesting. Flat, interesting word. So when you write, and you're editing, do you work with certain rhythms or certain forms or poetic tools, devices like that? Do those occur to you consciously as you're writing your poem, or do you sometimes write a poem and then you see that they're in there already?
Sometimes they're conscious. Like, I think probably the most conscious decision I make when I'm writing a poem is what kind of stanza I want. Do I want a couplet? Do I want a quartet? Do I want triplets? So those are the right terms. That is probably the most conscious decision that I make. I don't count syllables. I considered it, and then I just kind of threw it. To me, it's sort of a hindrance. But there are other things too that I try to avoid. Like accidental rhyming. And that happens. It happens, and it's okay. If it happens, it happens. You can go back and edit that. But I generally try to keep that out of a final draft of something. And I don't know where it comes from. I don't know where it comes from. I guess I feel it feels kind of amateurish. I mean, not to say that I'm a professional or anything, but it feels a little too much like rock lyrics.
I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I guess I would say usually if there's accidental rhyming in your poem, there's only a couple places where you're rhyming, and to me it doesn't seem to fit the form.
Okay. Fair enough. So 200 poems maybe about, and I'm wondering if you go back, days, weeks, months, years, and reread poems, and then find yourself, I'm going to put a different word in there. I'm going to change that line. I'm going to delete that. Do you find yourself doing that?
Yeah, I do, and it's exactly like you said. It's like a word here, a word there, a comma here. Maybe move a couple words into a different stanza or a different line, break the lines a little bit different. I definitely do that. I do that mostly when I'm kind of stuck on creating something new. When I'm, for lack of a better word, if I have writer's block, I'll go back to old work and try and form it into something.
Okay, very good. So you have a second poem. Would you read it for us?
Yes. Okay. Third date. In the black period after each of our last sentences, a fog surrounds what might be the end. But when we look away with equal distance, a buoy appears, as an urge to wander down into the dead valley in search of the pile of lost firewood, left by an old mute hermit as a sacrifice for those caught just like this, each log stacked for the fire of perfect words, brittle and hidden for over 200 years.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that. So, 200 poems about. How long have you been writing?
I've been writing since I was 19. So I've been writing for 23 years.
And has it always been poetry, or have you tried your hand at fiction or other?
Yeah, I write fiction too. So I set out to be a fiction writer.
Oh?
Yeah.
Short stories, novels?
Yeah, I started with short stories. That's all I've ever written. So, but yeah, I set out to write short stories, and the only thing that really came out of me was poetry. So I thought maybe I should start reading poetry as well.
I think poets can be afflicted with a particular problem when they try to write fiction, and that is they never get through the paragraph. They're always changing the words in the first paragraph, and they can't get onto the second because they're so focused on individual words. I know writers who have had that problem, and that determined for them, I'm a poet. I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm stubborn. I don't want to give up on the fiction dream. I think of Raymond Carver, who is one of my biggest influences, and he seemed to be able to go back and forth between the two fairly easily.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So this poem that you just read is a newer piece than the first one. So how has your writing changed over time?
Well,
If it has.
Yeah, it has. I trust myself a little bit more than I used to. And I allow it to be simple.
Talk about that a little bit. Allow it to be simple.
Yeah, I think I allow a certain simplicity, like a plain spokenness in the writing. At least I think I allow the poem to be more accessible. I don't strain as hard to make, I don't put as many symbols in, maybe, let's see.
What do you mean by symbols?
Let's see. Okay, so for instance, in Holding the Line, what is it? When I'm talking about his wife, I say that she's used to the cold side of their bed, except nights that her burning arm finds their dog Orion, her smoke. So, like the symbol of Orion in that particular instance.
So something that represents something else.
Yeah.
An idea or a thought or an emotion.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, I think I paired. I'm a little more straightforward in the images and in the language. Maybe the ideas too. I don't necessarily. The ideas aren't quite as veiled as they used to be. It's not. There's not quite as much device in the writing as there used to be. So I think that's
Okay.
it.
Okay. So do you read novels and poetry, and I imagine you do, and if you do, what writers might you say have been big influences on your work?
Yeah, I would say with poetry, probably my biggest influence is a poet named David Berman. He was also a frontman for a band called the Silver Jews. And he came out with a book of poetry in 2000, back in 1999, I think it was 2000. And I read it and I was like, oh, thank God, you can do whatever the hell you want. You can do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. There are no limitations to this form. this forum, you can be yourself. You can completely be yourself. And reading his work really freed me up in that way. And since then, I'd say James Tate is a big influence. Charles Simic is a big influence. I write occasionally. I write confessional poetry. So I'd say Kim Adenizio is a big influence. She's a lot of them. Mark Strand is a big influence. Funny enough, when I was writing Holding the Line, I was reading a lot of Dylan Thomas. So I'd say he's an influence too. So, yeah, there's quite a few. Robert Wrigley was a big influence. Bob Hickok is an influence. So yeah, there's a good line. There's a Tom. I don't know. Yeah.
Great. And also, and you mentioned Raymond Carver a bit earlier. So I'm assuming you read him as well, and he's been an influence. Do you read short stories and novels, and who there influences you?
Yeah. Tobias Wolff. So as far as short stories go, Tobias Wolff is an influence. Andre Debout is an influence. Raymond Carver. Richard Ford writes both fiction and short stories, and he's been a big influence. Faulkner is, Steinbeck is, let's see. I really like Junot Diaz. I don't know if you've read him or not. Yeah. Junot Diaz is good. There's
Okay.
a good number.
Okay. A lot of different writers. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So, do you read your poetry to yourself out loud?
I do. Yeah, better than that, I record it. So I use the voice memo on my iPhone and record my poems and then play them back to myself.
Oh, and so how do you learn from that? You do that to hear yourself?
Absolutely. Take the page away, put the page away, close my eyes, and listen to it and see what kind of images it's bringing up in my head, what kind of feeling it's conjuring. So yeah, definitely. Do the words go well together? So yeah, is there assonance? Is there alliteration? These kind of things.
Right. Okay, so earlier we talked about form and devices and tools, and I'm aware of some of these things that may unconsciously have appeared in your work. For instance, I noticed you flustered by forgotten ways of freight. Okay,
Right.
And those that kind of a device creeped in there
Right.
unconsciously, subconsciously.
That's a good question. I think I work intuitively, and that's when you say, "Am I conscious of what I'm doing?" I'd say not. I would say not exactly. I'm conscious that I'm writing, in a poetic voice, attempting to create something poetic. But yeah, I would say when I'm first writing the poem, I'm not completely aware of every word.
Okay. So your routine as a writer, do you adhere to a certain routine? I write every morning, I write every afternoon, or both, or once a week, or do you have?
Yeah, I try to write every day, usually starting around 4 o'clock. And if I'm not writing something new, then I'm working on something old.
Okay, and where do you do this?
I do it at a coffee shop a lot of the time.
With people around?
Yes, and that's I was going to mention too. Where that's for me another source for just sit and listen to people. But yeah,
hearing their conversation.
Eavesdropping.
Oh.
Sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, then I write at home a lot too.
Okay. So this is a little bit of a almost metaphysical question, but why do you write?
I write to try and capture how I experience life.
Does it feel like a need? Like eating?
It doesn't. No. I write because I like to write. I write because I want to write, because I love writing. It used to be a need when I was younger. It was a need. It was a huge need. As I've gotten older, it's not as much of a need. But it is a desire, certainly.
Okay, great. Well, Joe, I want to graciously thank you for sharing your beautiful poems, your 2 poems with us today. Where might we find your poetry if we wanted to read more?
Okay, let's see. Well, Holding the Line is published in Harper Pallet, which is a literary journal out of Binghamton University in New York. Otherwise, let's see, there was one, I had a poem published on Prick of the Spindle. Or else, I had a number of poems published, other poetry in England. Cold Mountain Review out of Appalachian State University. A number of poems published locally here in Left of the Lake. You can find all the poems there. There's one at Blue Lake Review. But otherwise, if you want to hear my poetry, you could come to the Kenosha Writers Guild.
Great.
We're always looking for members.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you, audience. Again, this is Speaking of Our Words. It is a production of the Kenosha Writers Guild. Please come to one of our meetings, which are on the 2nd and 3rd Thursdays of each month at 6:30 p.m. at Carthage College. The meetings are open to anyone, and we welcome your attendance. Please visit our KenoshaWritersGuild.com website or like our Facebook page, and feel free to leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Until the next video, I'm Marshall Smith. Goodbye.
Right.